Name is Bill Roy. I was in the U.S. Marine Corps from 1966 to 1969. I joined, I think I was 19 actually when I joined, and pretty young. And I actually, I probably could have ended up staying in the States, but I decided to volunteer for Vietnam. There were friends of mine over there. I knew they were over there. They were, some of them were killed, I have to say. And I just didn't feel like I was entirely doing my part. I just felt like I needed to be there. And so even though I had a wife and a baby, in retrospect, you know, if I think about it today, I probably should not have done that. I still had a role to play even in the States, and I could have stayed with my family. But at that time, I was young and ambitious and gung-ho and all of that, and I thought, man, I'd best serve my country by being there. Kind of an interesting little story. Right out of high school, I went to college for a year up at Northern Michigan University in Marquette, and spent the better part of that year partying. Didn't really accomplish a whole lot, and of course, the Vietnam War was going pretty strong at that time, and at the end of that first year of college, I decided that I wasn't. I was spending my parents' hard-earned money and not really anything coming good of it. So I decided to go and talk to a Marine Corps recruiter with two of my best buddies. We were all going to go in on the buddy plan, which means that you go in and you pretty much spend your time in the same outfit, if you will, during your entire tour of duty, doing whatever. And so the three of us listened to the Marine Corps recruiter, and he passed us the sheets of paper, and I'm all fine with it, just filling it all out and ready to go in. And I looked at my two buddies, and they looked at one another. They said, you know, we really don't want to do this. So they decided to go across the street to the Army recruiter, and they joined the Army. Went to Europe for 2 years, and I spent, of course, my 3-year tour in the Marine Corps, separated from them, and now considered my former best friends. I was stationed in California, did my infantry training there, and all my other training was there. Spent, other than Vietnam, I spent all my entire time in the California area. So at any rate, that's how I got into the Corps, and right after I got out of boot camp, I got married, and then my wife and my son moved to California with me there until I went to Vietnam. When I first got there, I was involved in actually administration, involved for a few months doing legal entries for legal court-martials and things of that nature. And then eventually I got into what they call photogrammetry, which is where we would be involved in laying out and designing remote airstrips in the jungles of Vietnam, where they needed to, you know, clear an area and lay down the metal mats that they typically would use for their runways. And you know, they'd need drawings and stuff for that, so I'd work in the field to get the information I needed, come back, draw it all up, and then we'd get it built. And so that's pretty much how I spent my Vietnam tour over there. Spent the first 3 months over there in Quang Tri Dong Hai area up north, not too far from the DMZ area, and then from there I got transferred down to Da Nang, where I spent the balance of my tour over there in Da Nang. So April was there from April '68, or March of '68 to April '69. So Marines, as you know, we were over there for 13 months. Everybody else was only over there for 12, but the Marines 13 months. So that's the way it was over there. It was a little unnerving because you could hear things going on around you, and the very first thing they did was they put me on a helicopter from where we landed. Actually, we landed in Da Nang in a commercial airliner there, Pan Am, and they within the day I was on a helicopter on my way to Quang Tri, so I was immersed right into it, right from the get-go, if you want. And so my first 3 months, as I say, were in Quang Tri, and those were interesting months there. From a skirmish standpoint, a lot of things went on up there. I was kind of happy to get transferred to Da Nang, where it was a little bit less active down that way. So, yeah. Well, surprisingly enough, before they send you over there, they give you the gamma globulin shot, and that shot was meant primarily, as I understood it anyway, to thin the blood and to make those warmer temperatures more tolerable. So I have to say that all the while I was over there, I never really was affected too much by the weather. It didn't really bother me all that much. It was warm and wet sometimes, but it really wasn't much of a factor for me. I was glad about that. Well, I think the probably the best memories I have over there is actually being able to radio phone and talk to my wife on occasion. Wasn't very often, and mostly you were always glad to get mail. I mean, that was a very important thing over there, to get mail and cards and things of that sort. But communications were pretty tough. I mean, you might get a month's worth of mail all at one time, that kind of thing, or the radio phone, that was not, and you could never say anything about where you were or what you were doing, or any of that. So you were somewhat limited what you could talk about. And then there were a couple times, where you kind of mixed it up with some of the Vietnamese children. That was kind of fun. I enjoyed that. You always had to be a little careful though, because it doesn't happen to me, but you hear stories of kids just walking up to you with a hand grenade, the pin pulled, that kind of thing, or they'll drop a hand grenade down into your gas tank or your Jeep with some tape wrapped around it. So when the tape dissolved, then the grenade went off. So you had to kind of watch them, watch where they were at, watch where you were, watch where they were. But still, it was enjoyable. Those were enjoyable moments for me. In the early weeks, maybe even months, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I had some issues. I'd find myself getting up in the middle of the night, loading my 30-30 Winchester, and standing at the front door of the window, staring out in the dark, just trying to figure out, you go through you kind of relapse back into, I think, some of the tenseness that you went through. A lot of things happened at night. A lot of rocket attacks. A lot of things happened at night over there. So nighttime back home was challenging for those first few months. Just trying to wrap myself around the fact that I was actually back in country and safe again, and all of that. So. But I got through it. It took maybe several months at the most, but I was able to get through it okay. Yeah. At least I think I got through it okay. It seemed to be normal these days. I have, in all honesty, I felt strongly for those who felt that way. But for me personally, honestly, I just did my job. I wasn't particularly interested in receiving any kind of accolade or thank yous. I just felt more like I just had a job to do, and I wasn't especially looking for the big thank you. But of course, now you have people walking up to you today, and they know you're a Vietnam veteran, and they thank you for your service, and that all feels great. And I'm very appreciative of all that. And I know a lot of veterans are, appreciative of that. But I didn't feel, at the time, I wasn't disgruntled by any of it. I just felt, I knew that there was an element in the country that just was totally against the war. And, in our country, that's what makes our country great. That's why we fight for our country, is to allow that, diverse opinion and all of that. So, it was, a lot of folks had trouble with it. I didn't particularly have a lot of trouble with it. So. Well, the nice thing about the being in the service at that time, when I got back from Vietnam, and they knew, and I knew, that I wasn't going to re-enlist and that I was going to be leaving, being discharged. There was a program that the military established where you could assimilate yourself back into the civilian workplace. They would have local businesses that would participate, if you will, in bringing military into their organization, training them, and giving an opportunity for a job when they were discharged. So that happened to me. I was able to be trained by a company in California, with the understanding that, and I wasn't obligated, but it was a job waiting for me if I wanted it when I got out. And I thought that was great. It was a great program. We ended up actually coming back to Michigan for a variety of reasons, even though the job was offered to me. But and then coming back here, I decided to go to school. And actually, the military helped us out there with with helping to pay for our education. So that was very, very helpful, very useful. It allowed me to get a college degree. I got my college degree. It was in architecture. I became a registered architect. Worked for some firms in the Detroit area while I was going to school, and then I moved up here in '76 and worked for an architect here. And then in 1981, I took over the firm, and I've been in practice here in the Ludington area since then. I'm actually semi-retired now. I have a little studio in my home, and my son Bill is also an architect who has an office that we maintain an office in Grand Rapids, and so he runs that office, and I'm pretty much semi-retired now. Actually, now that you mention it, yes, I do. I actually have what they call ischemic heart disease, and I'm right now in the final stages of getting my disability approved. I have to take nitro every day and this, that, and the other thing. And as far as the government's concerned, Agent Orange was a direct contributor to ischemic heart disease. So they don't even really ask a lot of questions. If you have it, you're eligible for disability, and I'm in the final stages of getting that approved. Thinking back, I remember, especially in the Quang Tri Dong Ha area, and being in the areas where you needed to clear jungles for runways and things. They used a lot of that Agent Orange exfoliant to kill off, literally kills off everything. So my exposure was, I think, obvious. I knew it was going on, but you didn't think anything of it at the time, of course. So I find myself, I think that the symptoms, the early symptoms, of course, right now even. Can't even go outside, especially in cold weather, and grab a few pieces of wood without having some issues. So that's what's going on with that. So
my name is Dale Chimel. I was a Spec 5. I was in the Army, and I was a mechanic. I was there from September 1968 till the end of August 1969. I was 20 when I got there. I turned 21. I was one of the older ones. It was like walking into an oven, coming off an air-conditioned airplane and then walking out into South Vietnam. Our base camp was in Swan Lock, which was northeast of Saigon, probably 40, 50 miles. And we covered the whole Third Corps area, which went from the South China Sea to Cambodia. And it was, I don't know how wide it was, but it was a pretty good size area. We were the only self-supporting regimental sized unit in Vietnam, so whenever one of the big units like the 1st Cav or 1st Infantry or 25th, if somebody needed armor, they would call us and we would go with them and support them. Best memory, I guess, is the friends I made. I still keep in contact with many of them. And I guess the worst memory is when, you saw people getting killed and, stuff like that. It just wasn't, it was hard on everybody when someone got killed. We'd get up in the morning, and depending on what was going on, we'd usually have sea rations for breakfast. And after that, if we were in a forward area or a night defensive position where we had tracks to work on, we would go to work on the tracks. Or if we were going out on patrol, then I would go out. When I first got there, I stayed in the rear area most of the time, but I think it was like in December, they came around and asked, they needed a mechanic to go out on a mission with the 3rd Platoon. And like Dan said, I was the older guy, and when they asked for a volunteer, everybody just kind of shuffled their feet, and nobody really wanted to go, and I said, I'll go. So I grabbed my M16 and my toolbox and jumped on a track, and that's where I rode the rest of the time I was there. But so when you were riding on a regular day, if you were out on a patrol, you'd just be riding through the jungle or sometimes guarding roads for like when they had convoys. You'd set up road convoy, well, not really an escort. We'd sit alongside the road and make sure that nobody bothered them. Other than that, we spent a lot of time out just busting jungle and looking for NVA. At night, we'd sleep on the track. We could get 3 people could sleep inside, and usually there was one person on guard, so it worked out pretty good. So whenever one other one come off a guard, he'd go down to sleep in your spot, and he'd wake up the next guy, and the next guy was sleeping in his spot. So, but it was a little better than being in the infantry because you didn't have to worry about sleeping on the ground. Not really. About the only thing I had is it seemed like I could never get to a dentist, and I had a tooth that abscessed on me while I was there, and I had to go back to base camp to get that taken care of. That and hearing loss. I did have hearing loss from the machine guns and stuff, explosions. People are backing them. When we came home, the only ones that supported us was our families. Everybody else. I can remember seeing some people on the street after I came home, and I was home for a while, and said, where you been? I haven't seen you for a while. I said I was in Vietnam. Nobody knew. Nobody cared. Right. It's just now people, they're sending stuff to the troops and making sure that they get things at Christmas, and they didn't do that back then. It wasn't a popular war. Of course, the wars today aren't real popular either, but people are backing the soldiers. Oh, I'm excited for them, because I know when I got off the plane at Oakland, California. It wasn't Oakland; it was at the Air Force Base there. Everything was fine, but then when I was discharged, I had to go to Oakland Air Force, or not Air Force Base, but Oakland Airport to go home, and there were people in there giving people a hard time, And of course, we had to wear a uniform, or we didn't get the discount on the flight. So there were people there harassing everybody. The unit that I was with, we had, like I say, we have a reunion every year, and so 5 years ago, I invited a bunch of them to come to Ludington. Well, what happened was the reunion was in Oregon, and nobody wanted to go. It was too far away. They said, well, let's do something different next year. Let's go to somebody's house. And everybody said, yeah, okay. And well, they called me up and said, yeah, we're coming to your house. I said, cool. So they did, and there was 9 guys came here. They're from as far away as Texas, Tennessee, Ohio. They came. We spent the weekend here at my place. They stayed at the hotel. I had a couple of people that stayed right at the house. I just took them around, tried to show them what Ludington is, which it doesn't take much to show them that. But a highlight of the whole thing was one of the guys wanted a carom board. So we went down to Carom, and they were having a yard sale. and all the guys bought something from Carom. You know, it was just kind of funny. We just had a good time. But of course, my daughters went around and looked to different businesses, asked them if they would make some kind of a donation. And so my daughters made them up each a nice basket with all the stuff that they'd gotten. They had gotten some wine, and they got some cups, and they got free ice cream at the Park Dairy or the House Flavors, and they also got some fudge from the fudge shop. And you know, everybody was really appreciative. In fact, one of the guys, Mike Yesh, when they gave him the baskets, he started crying. He said, "I've never had anybody thank me for my service in Vietnam." And it was pretty emotional. My kids got to see something that most people don't get to see, you know. So we had a really good time. And I keep in touch with all these guys. I have like 10, 15 guys that I call them, you know, keep in touch with them, sometimes by email. And so we've been friends for a long time. I thought what we were doing was the right thing, you know. I saw how the people lived there, and when the Americans were there, the South Vietnamese had a much higher standard of living than they did before we got there, and I thought it was a good thing. I can remember times when we had worked with South Vietnamese, with the Arvins, and we'd stop for lunch or something, and they would pull out a bag of rice. It was probably about that big and about that big around, and it must have been already cooked. So we would share our sea rations with them. They'd share their rice with us, you know. But yeah, they that's all they had was rice. If they wanted something else, they had to find it out in the field, you know, to supplement their diet. So they had it a lot tougher than we did. The first couple months was like I couldn't sit down. I had to be moving all the time, because I guess that's the way it was over there. You were always on edge. You never knew what was going to happen. And when I got home, you know, I just had to be moving all the time. And I can remember the other thing that, you know, when we would go someplace, we would always track the vehicle in front of us so that we didn't hit a mine. And I found myself doing that with a car, trying to stay in the tracks of the car in front of me, you know. Just, I don't know why, but it was just something that you learned over there, and it was hard to break it for a while. When I got home, I was home for 2 or 3 months, got married, and I've got 3 kids. I worked at Dow Chemical for a while, and then that was when the project was going. So I had a chance to go out the project, which was double the money, so I went out there and worked for 3 years. When I was done there, I reapplied at Dow, and it was about 6 or 9 months later they hired me back. And I worked there for about a year, and I got a job as a millwright, and I worked for 30 years as a millwright at Dow until I retired.
My name is Ron Martin. I was in Vietnam in April of '67 till April of '68. My MLS was a 45G20, which is a turret mechanic. What's a turret? That's that thing on a top of a tank where all the soldiers function, you know. Tank commander, gunner, and loader. Well, I got this letter from the President of the United States, Lyndon Baines Johnson. It says, "Greetings. You have been drafted in the United States Army." Well, I did one better. I joined. I got my draft notice in July of '66, and I joined just after that, you know, because I liked it so much. So I went in the Army September of 1966. Went down there in Fort Knox, did our basic training, did my AIT there at Fort Knox as a turret mechanic. Then I got orders in March of '67 to head over to Vietnam. I was stationed in the central highlands of Vietnam, about 250 miles north of Saigon, which today is known as Ho Chi Minh City. Our job was from the South China Sea all the way through the central highlands to the Cambodian border and the Laotian border. That's what we had a big area. Vietnam isn't that very wide, maybe 80 miles, but it's a long, so. Scared as hell. And it was the early morning, and you got walked off. There was an Air Force jet. It was a C-141, and the seats are backwards. And they let the back deck or whatever down, tailgate or what, you walked off of that, and man, the humidity hit you right in the face, and they put you on buses, and you looked around wondering where in the heck you were, it was just, it was so humidity, and the buses had screen protection, so none of the, they throw hand grenades in there, and so they took us over at our place where we was going to be there for, I don't know, 3 or 4 days. And I didn't see him, but Bruce Borma's insurance out of Fountain there, he saw me there, I didn't see him. They took us, we left, I was supposed to report to Oakland, California. Then we left McCord Air Force Base. We flew to Travis Air Force Base in Washington. From there, we went to Alaska. And Alaska to Japan, and Japan to South Vietnam, down to Benoit was by Saigon there. We was there, then they send you to where you're supposed to go to your unit. Well, they send me up to An-Kay. Says they looked at my order. We don't need you here, so it's been another 3 or 4 days, and they sent me over to Pleiku where I was supposed to go. So right back. That was at An-Kay was the first air cav, and over there, Pleiku was the 4th Infantry Division. Well, my company was attached to the 1st Cav over there at Unsung on the coast, South China Sea there. So I spent about 6 months over there at Unsung, and at the time I was the only turret mechanic, and I was a greenhorn, and man, I had to learn fast, because the only way I got around was with the choppers, Because they'd call in, it says, well, you need a Tango Mike. That stood for a turret mechanic, and so I'd go out there in the field, and you stay right there until you got your job done and all that. Then you had to find your way back, to where you were stationed at there. So we was there about 6 months. Then we moved back towards the Pleiku area just before the Tet Offensive of '68 there, and the air base needed some protection, because they didn't have no security really, and so we was there about a week before the Tet Offensive, and then all hell broke loose, and they came out of the woodwork, and how good our intelligence is. They didn't know they were there, So that's, then, after the Tet Offensive, we was on bridge securities, for the convoys, every once in a while they'd get, you know, ambushed there. It was the Yang Pass. It's a famous pass there between Anke and Pleiku, so, you know, for all the convoys. And then we started to get a lot of activity in the area. This is around March, you know, and they said, "Oh, Ron, we're going to come and get you with a chopper," you know. Well, they never did. And so me and this captain, we had to go drive into the 4th Infantry Division there, and with all that activity, you know, just me and him driving, and those 3/4 ton trucks, they only go about 35, and he told me I was going too fast. To this day, I don't know who that guy is. I've been trying to find out because, yeah, I want to get my 2 cents worth into him. But so then after I rotated out, I went from Pleiku to Cameron Bay to come on home, you know. So it was just a civilian aircraft, and we just flew from Cameron Bay to Okinawa. And when we landed there, they had B-52 bombers on both sides of the runway. That was very impressive there, you know. Then it was a straight flight from Okinawa over to Fort Lewis, Washington, and on your way home there, you know, they give you a steak, but I never ate it because I wanted to get it out of there as fast as I could to get home, you know. I left about 9 o'clock in the morning, Vietnam, and I was in my own bed that same day at 10:30, you know. Well, when I got back from Vietnam, I took all the time, 45 days. I took as long because I had a girlfriend back here, you know, so, you know. And my orders from Vietnam, my next duty station would have been California. Because when you go into service, they ask you what stateside duty do you want and what oversized duty station you want. I put down California and Germany. Well, I made a special trip down to Fort Knox. I went on down there, and they told me that they didn't need me. Well, that's what I do. That was my MOS, a turret mechanic, and that was the Armor Center of. So I talked to Washington, D.C., and got my orders changed from California to Fort Knox, Kentucky. So I had another year and a half to do it. So that's where I spent my last year and a half, over in Fort Knox, Kentucky, you know. Guarding the gold, you know, that was my... So I got a early out, 7 days, to go to college at Ferris. So when I came out, I went to college at Ferris. And we had a veterans club there. We had about 250 veterans there. And that was about the second largest one in the United States at the time, over to Ferris. Oh, great, man. I never experienced it, thank God, but some of my buddies tell me that they were harassed and spit upon when they came. They was told not to even wear their uniforms when they came back, so, you know. I was lucky. I got to come back home on April Fool's Day. My best memory of Vietnam was bringing the wall to Ludington here this last summer.
You did a good job.
That was a great experience for everybody. And my worst memory of it is all the friends I lost there. You know, that's the worst memory there is. Our unit, you know, the 69th Armor, gets together here every 2 years. And I was elected president of the 69th Armor Association. So we're going to have it up here in 2016 in Traverse City, our reunion. So, and we will have, this year, we're going to meet down in Kokomo. They have a big reunion down there for all the personnel, military personnel down there. I've never been down there, and they say it's really a great thing. And our association is going to be meeting down there this year, just on an off year. So I'm looking forward to that. Military organizations, I'm a life member of the VFW. I belong to the American Legion. And I'm also on a committee, Michigan Veterans Trust Fund here. We help out veterans here in Michigan who need the help. So I'm pretty active in, helping veterans. That there's still a lot of veterans out there who needs help, and we try to help them through different organizations. Here in Mason County, we have a foundation to help veterans. We had about over $6,500 left over from the Vietnam traveling tribute wall here, and we gave it to them. So hopefully that will help out in a certain way. Yeah, I'm 100% disability. I get. Because of Agent Orange, I have diabetes and other stuff too. Through the VA out of Traverse City, we go to counseling twice a month. We meet up to Calava there at the VFW. We have a counselor. We have about 15 to 20 guys, just Vietnam veterans, show up there, and they discuss for about an hour and a half their problems, and if they're having any problems and all that, So that helps out greatly too, relieve that edge. You can say whatever you want to say, So they treat us good up there at Traverse City, and we have a couple outings in the summertime, a picnic, and at Christmas time they have a little get together too. So it's nice, I wish more guys would get involved that way too. It would help them out. And I don't know if the guys feel like they don't have it coming to them, benefits. There's benefits out there that would help them greatly, financial wise, and would help them out greatly, I know here along in Leadington we got a lot of homeless veterans, but they don't want to, they don't want to, they just want to be left alone, So I feel like, when you talk about it, it does you good, There was 4 of us guys from Ludington here. We went over to Cadillac. I think it was in 2012 or 11, it doesn't matter. But anyhow, we went over there. And so I bought a few roses, I looked for certain guys on the name over there from Vietnam that was in our group there, and this one especially was was a lieutenant. And so I put it there, and one of the guys who was there was Phil Quinlan. He was a middle school teacher over there, and he had his camera, and he was kind of doing a documentary of it. You know, we didn't go over there for that. Well, anyhow, he got on a website on something and found a woman looking for information on her dad. Well, she was only 4 months old at the time of this lieutenant getting killed over there in Vietnam. So it started there. We brought her and her mother here to Ludington from Minnesota. And oh man, she wanted to know, before we brought her here, I talked with her on the phone. She wanted to know what her dad was like, because they got into a little skirmish over there and he was killed during the nighttime. And they sent me out there the next day to look at the tank and see if there was any, and it still kind of haunts me today. And I looked inside the tank and there's just, you know, a mess, you know. And so we brought them over here, and, you know, it was a great relief to see her. And she, you know, she even did a speech there at one of the ceremonies we had at the wall there. So hopefully I'll get to see her again. You know, I was glad to do it for her. Yep, that's a wrap. That's a wrap.